Hello, it's me, I'm Nafid. This is a video about HPE Comware switches. Now it's part one of three parts. In here, we will talk about basic setup. We'll talk about how to protect the management access. And the last bit, we'll talk about how to manage software and configurations on that switch. Let's have a look. Basic setup. The objectives of this module is to look into the console, how to connect to the Comware devices, which are HPE devices, describe the characteristics and purpose of each privilege level. They work a little bit different. They work in views, and so if you do come from different backgrounds, and that looks a little bit different. We'll navigate through the CLI command, some basic configuration, some interface config, troubleshoot common issues, and basic connectivity. So when Comware we need to manage, we can manage them locally through the console port or through the auxiliary port. Now, you can come across switches or routers. Now, in terms of naming convention, switches we call console, if you like, auxiliary 0. That's the main console port for the switch. And for the routers, is the auxiliary basic is secondary access. For the routers, we use console. So the word console in routers means console as we know it. Auxiliary is the secondary CLI port that you can connect and manage the routers as well, out of band management. You can do remotely or in band or even out of band using SSH, Telnet, SNMP. We'll discuss each individual one of these commands. Obviously, we don't have to go through. This is typical traditional serial interface, 9-pin interface, and then nowadays switches normally come with RJ45 like interface or USB-C, the newer ones. So there we go. That's an example of a console port here, and that's basically how to start connection to the switch initially if you need to do any configuration. So this is basically serial interface. You can use POTI, TerraTerm, any term emulator program that you can connect with this auxiliary or console port. In this case, we can see the router with a console that has USB-C as well as RJ45 like interface. You can clearly see that one in here. Also, we can have what's called out of band management called management port. You can clearly see this. So there are multiple different ways to connect to the switch if you need to connect to it locally or remotely. Naming convention with these switches come with the member ID, slot number, and port number if you like. Now it depends if the switch or the router is modular. Normally member ID by default is 1 here. That's then the slot number 0, that's a default. If it is modular, obviously you can see slot maybe 1, slot 2, and then that's the interface of the card line inside that slot or line card. For the routers, normally go with the number, which is basically slot 0, and the module or the ID of that will be normally serial 10 or something around that. It depends on the number, and you can see them printed on the interface. Now, the tricky part here is how Comware, the mentality of Comware. Comware is different. So they have what's called context or views. We have two main views. We have, of course, the login when you log in, but you have the user view and the system view. Now it doesn't work in a way, it's like a privilege mode and user mode like in Cisco we have read-only access operator mode or manager mode in Aruba. It works slightly different. In the system view, we'll do all the configuration. In the user view, normally we'll do things like flash management, rename, delete, update, upgrade, troubleshoot, debug commands, and so on. Save, delete, working config, all of that is done in a user view. So in a sense, we can't say user view is less privileged than the system view. Okay, for example, if you need to telnet to somewhere, to a different system from the switch, you do this one from a user view. But if you need to configure the telnet settings, for example, or SSH settings, you do it from the system view. Maybe in a nutshell, the system view is to do with the configs, and the user view is to do with the file management, remote connectivity, and so on. Troubleshooting, that's user view. Okay, but many commands like display command, bin command works in both views. So any diagnostics commands sort of work in both views. But again, the likes of display command, which is equivalent to the show command in Cisco, Aruba devices as well. You can always use the context help. So you can use the question mark, Q to quit, of course. So we are in the system view by seeing the square brackets here. The user view is characterized by the angle brackets. So square brackets means we are in the system view. Question mark will list everything. So if you have a question mark, it will list all possible commands. We can use the tab command. So if there's unique combination of letters, it will show you the completed command. If it is multiple, then it will go through multiple matches. You continue press the tab, will cycle through them. So we'll go like tab in here, sys, then system working mode, and so on and so forth. Now some shortcuts, of course, Control A, Control C. These are nice ones. Many people use the up arrow key, down arrow key. Control A is a good one, Control E. All of these are possible to have, control the cursor axis and how to move the cursor to make life easier for you when you manage the switch on the command line. Let's take an example. So when you connect to the switch, you are on the user view. You can see the angle brackets. Type sys or system view, then sysname, which is equivalent to the host name. So you can say sysname my switch, interface VLAN 1 because that's the default VLAN. Give it an IP. There's no slash here, notice it's a space. And then IP root, which is the default root basically. Save you saving the configuration by the word save. Force, it means you're forcing, it doesn't really prompt you for anything else. When you say save force as an option, you can basically will not be prompted, are you sure you'd like to save the configuration? And then you can say display current config is equivalent to the show running config command. You can look at the interface configuration. So you go to the interface, you're on the, again, system view. You go to the interface, description, undo, and is equivalent to no. No shutdown means undo shutdown or shutdown. And the rest, you can do stuff here. Remember, the undo equal to no command. Display this is really one of the great commands that you are in the context of something. Like in this case, you're on the context of the interface. When you issue the command display this, it means show me all the configuration under that context. You can have also a nice command for interface range. Interface range, this to that and this. It means I am targeting interfaces 1 to 4 and 7. I'm shutting down all of these, right? So interfaces 1 to 4 up to, and then interface 7, then I'm shutting them down in this command. I can show display interface brief. It will show me. This command is a great command. It shows you both layer 2 interfaces as well as layer 3 interfaces, because that's generic word, show or display interface brief. Display interface brief will show you layer 2 interfaces as well as layer 3 interfaces will be displayed with all details. We'll come back to this PVID, which is native VLAN. We call this one PVID, port VLAN ID, which is the untagged VLAN. And you can see by default on these interfaces, there are VLAN 1 on all these interfaces. You can use the pipe command to filter, display interface brief, include, up, trunk, exclude, begin with, and so on. So display interface, and that will show you the details of that interface and the type, what kind of speed, bandwidth, and so on and so forth. Some really nice troubleshooting commands, you can say display diagnostic information is like show diagnostic. Display history, again, like show history command. Display current is like show running. Display saved, like show config files. Display info center, it shows you the loggings. And then save command, which is basically write mem, similar. And reboot is reload or reboot command, the same. Display version, display MAC, ARP, Bing command, trace route, debugging, and where to send the debug details to the interface. One of the things that are really important is LLDP, which is a layer 2 discovery or neighbor discovery mechanism that shows you the details of the neighbor at layer 2. It will tell you things like what's the IP management, IP capability of the switch or to the device next to you. What is the local interface identifier, what connects, like physically which interface you connected to the neighbor, and will show you both, right? And you can see a lot of information, quite important, LLDP. One of these things that in LLDP we can do things like voice VLAN configuration, auto config, tagging, power by Ethernet, duplex mismatch negotiation, speed of the interface, and so on. You can enable or disable LLDP. So globally by default enabled by, you can undo LLDP global enable, or you can do undo, which basically no command on the interface. So undo LLDP enable on the interface itself. Now we can see here display LLDP neighbor list, like show me abbreviated form of that. But I can see also detail of a specific interface. So I'm now able from this command to see the list of all my neighbors. And then I might be interested to see more details about this interface. So I'm going to show me the 40 gig Ethernet 1125. It will show me more details on that interface. As any other system, we can always interact with REST API. So the configuration or the communication between the devices and the external world, I can use REST API to send and receive commands, and I can have some code in Python, Ruby, or Java, or around this. I can send requests to get information, or can set certain parameters. Now, for the REST API to work on the switch, we need to set certain parameters on the switch itself. So we have to make sure SSH server is enabled, REST API HTTP is enabled, and of course you need to be able to reach to the switch, and you configure authentication, and then you will, this is a scheme, it means I'm configure local authentication, and with details of that authentication, and say the service type, which will come back to this. In a nutshell, you have to make sure that HTTPS and SSH as a service type, you are permitting communication to the switch for the REST API to work. And then I'm giving a user role, in this case, network admin. And I can communicate with the switch, so I can perform some configuration tasks, for example, or get information. Example of a simple code, sample code, something like this. You don't need to know it, but at least you should be aware of the fact that we can write a script and then communicate using that script to the switch, and the output of this script is showing me the interfaces basically. So it is simple script that we have sent and communicated with the switch that shows me the output of that specific script. Protecting management access in this training. The objective, protecting management access in this stand, the roles and how you associate them to password and scheme authentication, then SSH, Telnet, and SNMP. Now we have two methods of access. Out of band management, we're talking about either console or auxiliary port, depends if you are connected to a router or to a switch. The auxiliary port is the main one. On a router, console as the main one, and the auxiliary is the secondary one, if you like. Dial-up, you can dial up. We don't very much nowadays use that kind of stuff. Dedicated management VLAN or Ethernet connection, that's called out-of-band management, or a dedicated management interface out-of-band management. Inbound, when you send SSH or Telnet or HTTP, HTTPS, SNMP, syslog, all of these things, obviously, we use the same network as the data network, which is not really recommended because of, security, availability, and so on. You're talking about also AAA authentication. We need to believe who are you, and then I will authenticate you. Then once I authenticate you, I will give you resources, then I will need to follow up. Now, authentication can either be local authentication, where you can create local user on the switch, or connect to a remote system like a Radius or some sort of backend, maybe Active Directory here. That's remote authentication. Now, within Comware, we have what's called scheme. So to create a Radius authentication, you create a Radius scheme, you give it a name, and you have maybe one or multiple Radius schemes, IP addresses within the scheme, primary, secondary, key, primary accounting, secondary accounting, key accounting, and so on. These are the keys to communicate with the Radius. And then you create a domain, give it a name, and map the domain to the scheme. So you're going to say authentication login, and then Radius scheme. And as a backup method, you go local, meaning the scheme is not reachable, then the local will be the one that will be authenticating. The same applies to accounting. Now we have a role access system, role-based access control, where you can assign different roles for different connection, and these roles will dictate what kind of level of access do we have. We have network admin, the highest level of access, will perform all tasks, configuration tasks, every single one, except they don't see logs for the security. This is a security audit. Network operator, which is like kind of read only if you like. Display command. And then different levels. We have 0, 1, 9, 15, and so on. 9 is very common, especially if you have somebody who would like to configuration tasks but no file management. Also, this is the highest equivalent to network admin user role. Now, with the Comware, we have 3 different modes. None, meaning nothing. Console by default is none. Password, where you have a single password for everybody. And then scheme is where you have a lot of control, role-based control in this case, where you can control who accesses what in this case. So that scheme can be local. Of course, we can mix between local and remote authentication and so on. I can also restrict access with a password. So I might say line VTY, this is the number of possible concurrent connections, Telnet or SSH, 063, that's 64. Authentication mode, password, so you will provide password, this is simple, and whoever provides this password, the one that you configured here, they will get in this example to the user role level 0. Remember, user role level 0 is, simply speaking, is just kind of read only. Yeah, level 0 diagnostic command and external device access. So not much they can do in this case. And there's another concept called super password or super concept. So kind of if you wanted people to log in with by default with a certain level, like a read only or simple, that they can't do much, and then whoever needs to, in that context, to elevate the level of access, then we can use the super password. So super feature, you will configure you in the system view, remember, square brackets. Super authentication mode, you define which one of them or both. You can have multiple times you can issue this command. Super password, the role, you define the role and the password. So when you are, say, in the user view and you provide super password and you provide that password, whatever role here being configured, you'll be elevated to that role. You can also restrict access with local user accounts. So here, remember, you can do line BTY 063. Of course, the range can be less, like you don't want to open all these 64 virtual links or interfaces. You might go 0 to 9 or 0 to 4, for example. Authentication mode scheme, and in this example, we're creating a user, local-user Antonio, and the password make it, so this user has been added, and we create a password here for that user. And we have defined the service type equal SSH. And then the other authorization attribute for that user is level 9. So when that user connects with the SSH, they will get to level 9. I can have control over the password, of course. You can dictate things like password complexity. You can look at history of password. You can control access, how many commands even. I can look at things like control what commands this user can issue and so on. I can view these settings. By looking into the historical, for example, display password control. They will tell me so many things. They will tell me what settings are implemented for the password control. SSH access is one of the very common methods, like people remotely connect to the switch, and by default is disabled on the Comware devices. SSH server enabled, then you public local key create. So we're gonna have a key, and then example here, we can say SSH server enable, public key local, and create RSA. So the public key will be generated, the public key will be downloaded to the management station for SSH. Then that is the local user, service type. Again, this is when you create the user, and then you will have the service type mapped to the user, what that user can do. And then we said in here, authentication mode scheme for the line BTY 0 to 9, so 10 lines possible. And we specify for these lines SSH. And the user role, in this case, network operator, kind of read-only access. SNMP, again, SNMP simple network management protocol based on MIPS. And the best thing is, of course, we have 3 different versions. The non-secure, the plain text version 1 and version 2, C stands for community. Less secure, based on community string that is transmitted in the network with the clear text. And SNMP version 3 is the more secure version. You would rather go version 3 definitely, and once you configure version 3, of course, that is something that you can do a lot of control over that. So you define the encryption type, the integrity, i.e. the data that has not been, make sure that data has not been tampered with, and then you even specify what kind of MIPS does that user have access to. So many options in version 3. You would rather go version 3 rather than the version 1 or 2. Example of version 1 or version 2 configuration here. We can see examples. And example of version 3 that you set up. Obviously, you will set a username, password, what group of access, what kind of level of access. Detail of that access can be specified in version 3, SNMP version 3. Which is about managing software and configuration. What are the objectives? Understand the boot up process, HPE Comware switches, how to use the flash file system on HPE Comware switches, operating system upgrade, and managing files or configuration files on the HPE system. Now when the system boots up, it will go through the process of self-test and hardware test. And we have multiple options, like you can press Ctrl D for X modem if you need to go to a low level of system upgrade. Ctrl T and multiple other options. Ctrl B to have an extended boot menu, meaning I can do stuff when the extended boot menu is enabled. This is an example of extended boot menu where you can do reboot, you can restore factory default, delete config files, set switch startup mode. Multiple options. So if you have an issue with this, say for example with the password recovery, you can skip current system config that will bypass the password, and then you can reset your password as you on the system. You can have multiple options. Control P is basically when you skip, we need to skip authentication for the console. This is like a password recovery. Option 0 will reboot, and basically once you reboot, you're on the system view, and you can do display commands and so on. Display version is kind of show version command, if you like, and that will tell you the boot image file and multiple other details in this case. Again, dir will show you the content of the flash. Now dir, there's another option with that one /all. So the multiple options, really nice stuff here. dir /all shows you every file, included the ones that are in the recycle bin. Basically, when you delete a file, like in this case, you will delete it unless you use unreserved option. It will be moved to a recycle bin rather than being deleted. So it's kind of a pointer to the recycle bin. Unreserved means deleted immediately and does not place that file in the recycle bin. You can do upgrade. These are the things that you need to be aware when you do the upgrade. And eventually you will do upgrade based on either FTP, TFTP, USB flash. This is the last resort because that is very slow in bits per second, probably 9 bits per second, it depends. But this is if you have, say, corrupted flash, corrupted file system. You can use TFTP or FTP, and you can use the memory stick, and then define which bootloader. Now this command, because you might have multiple binary operating system files in the flash, and you're going to define which one is the main one, if need be, as an option, which one is the backup one. Now that is as far as the operating system is concerned. The files that are related to configuration, they are saved in the startup config, or they are in the running config. You can have multiple files basically. So display startup, it will tell you what's now. If anything set what's next, these two always have values. This might be null because you have not configured any backup startup file. And then defining, you can define the startup default startup config. So startup saved configuration and the file. The file might not be necessarily named as startup.cfg. It might be any name basically. So you can do backup startup configuration to a certain location. You can restore from. You can TFTP to get and put file, copy to or copy from. FTP IP, copy from flash to USB stick, memory stick. Reset save configuration is equivalent to write erase button. Here you can also define which configuration you would like to reset if you would like.